we are 4 days until Indiana goes to the polls, and we'll see whether Indiana is truly the firewall that Ted Cruz hopes that it is. Cruz campaign does seem to know that if they don't win there, it may be all over. They won't say it quite that way, but they have dealt perhaps their last hand in the Hoosier state against Trump today. They got Indiana Governor Mike Pence to announce that he will vote for Cruz in the primary. But folks, this was one of the most lukewarm, quote-unquote, endorsements you will ever hear.
I particularly want to commend Donald Trump, who I think has given voice to the frustration of millions of working Americans. I'm also particularly grateful that Donald Trump has taken a strong stand for Hoosier jobs. I've come to my decision about who I'm supporting, and I'm not against anybody, but I will be voting for Ted Cruz in the upcoming Republican primary.
Pence is up for re-election. He's one of the few, Indiana's one of the few states, about a dozen of them, a little less than a dozen, that hold their gubernatorial election on the presidential year. His support for Cruz speaks volumes to the current state of the race, and it's a clear warning to Republicans around the country that Trump and his supporters are a force to be reckoned with. So with time running out, where does Cruz go from here? I spoke with Cruz today as part of a longer interview that will air on Sunday's Meet the Press. Here's a snippet. If you don't win Indiana, do you get out of the race?
Indiana is an important state. We are competing hard. We're barnstorming the state. We're on a bus tour, Heidi and I and the girls and Carly, and we're seeing great support in Indiana. And I will say this, Indiana has a chance to choose. Do we want to support a campaign that is based on yelling and screaming and cursing and insults? Or do we want to unify behind a positive, optimistic, forward-looking conservative campaign based on real policy solutions to the problems
facing this country? So if Indiana rejects you, if they're rejecting that argument, are they not?
Well, I don't believe so. I think the support we're seeing is surging. There's a reason Governor Mike Pence offered his support. He's hearing from Hoosiers across the state that don't want a campaign that is based on yelling and bullying. They want real solutions.
You can hear a lot more of my interview with Senator Ted Cruz Sunday on Meet the Press. Of course, check your local NBC station. Meanwhile, let's stay with the topic of Indiana. I'm joined by Pete Seat. He's a former communications director for the Indiana Republican Party. By the way, full disclosure, he's also a consultant for the Kasich campaign, although the Kasich campaign apparently is not campaigning in Indiana anymore. Mr. Seat, welcome back to the show, sir.
Thank you, Chuck. Thanks for having me.
And Pete, let me confirm that. You're a consultant for the Kasich campaign. What has that meant in Indiana?
Well, as you mentioned, it's a dormant campaign at this moment, so there's really not much to do. Although, to be honest with you, I've been busier since the campaign shifted west than we were when we were an active campaign fielding calls from fine folks like you.
I am curious, did you already vote? Do you feel as if, and if you haven't, are you telling people, even if you support Kasich, to vote Cruz?
I have voted, and I voted for John Kasich, which seems to be the case across the board for a lot of people. If you look at the Howey poll, which was the first statewide poll that came out, 22% for John Kasich. The ARG poll that came out today, 21%. So according to those two, he's holding firm with his support.
Is that good or bad as far as you're concerned?
Well, if folks can make their strategic decision, and if they want to vote for Ted Cruz, they're free to do that. No one is telling them what to do. But I think what you're seeing here is the problem that some people, especially in the donut counties around Indianapolis, have with Ted Cruz. They find it hard to stomach voting for him, even though they understand the strategic implications of making that vote.
Are you willing to accept the idea that if Trump wins Indiana on Tuesday, he's the nominee?
Well, I've said it, that we're going to have a pretty clear picture on May 3rd, if not the morning of May 4th, depending on how long it takes to count these votes. We're going to have a pretty clear picture of whether or not he's going to get to 1237.
And let me ask you this. Why was Governor Pence's, I guess you want to call it an endorsement, so tepid?
Well, usually that's what I ask you, Chuck. You're supposed to explain those things to me. But I think it's because it's Mike Pence. We know here on the ground that's just the kind of guy he is. He doesn't want to ruffle too many feathers. He wants to keep the peace. And whereas he's going to vote for Ted Cruz on Tuesday, he didn't want to upset people who he needs on his side ultimately in his tough reelection campaign as well.
Well, it's a decision. I think we see a lot of Republican office holders who believe they'll face voters again in a Republican primary someday, that they want to be very, very careful in how they treat Trump. Anyway, Pete Seat, longtime Indiana Republican. Thanks for coming on. Good to check in with you.
Thanks, Chuck.